Welcome to today's episode of The Enigma. Today, we have a very exciting episode about the Midnight Game. Be sure to watch it till the end. I assure you, you don't want to miss this. Enjoy. My name is Sarah. I'm 11 years old and I live in a quiet town called Redcrest. There aren't many people living here, but everybody knows everybody. It's a really beautiful town, especially during sunset. I guess this is what makes the town so charming. I live with my mom in a small house in Cedar Street. We struggle financially, especially after my dad passed away 3 years ago due to a car accident. But somehow, over time, we managed to get used to it. It happened when I was in my 3rd grade. Usually, my dad would come home from work every single night around 7 p.m. I would hear him calling my name in the living room, and then he would say to me, "Aren't you gonna give your dad a kiss?" I remember when all of that was gone. It was a Thursday night. My mom and I were sitting on the living room couch watching TV whilst waiting for him to come home. But an hour passed and he was still yet to arrive. As time went on, we grew even more anxious. Then, the phone rang. My mom answered. I remember the look on her face when she received the news. She collapsed on the floor as she broke down crying. It's just too much to take in, especially for a kid like me. And just like that, my dad was gone from our lives forever. My mom had to sacrifice in order to make ends meet by working long hours as a cashier at the nearby grocery store. Because she is rarely at home, I had often asked my mom to drop me off at my friend's house, Jody. Since I'm the only child in my family, I always wanted a sister, and Jody has been exactly that. Michael, who is also a friend from school, would come along as well since he lives right across Jody's house. There aren't really anything much to do here in Redcrest, so my friends and I often have to find creative ways to spend time together, or else we'll end up getting bored. Other than the normal playing in the backyard and walking around town, the unusual ones are my favorite kind of outings. Once, we decided to do a bit of exploring at the nearby woods near school, and lo and behold, we found a rather odd house abandoned in the woods. The house was quite small and it was in a critical condition. Some of the windows were boarded up with wood planks and plants were starting to overtake the house. We were curious as to whom the house belonged to, so we made up some stories about it. This is a fantastic location to hide a body. Don't you guys think so? Said Michael. I mean, for all we know, this house could have a secret basement or something, he continued. Or, this house was probably belonged to a witch, since witches tend to seclude themselves from the rest of the village. I mean, look at the pentagram. That's probably where the sacrifices are taking place, I replied. Oh my God, said Jody, her eyes wide open, listening intently to what I said as if it was real. Michael smiled whilst rolling his eyes. Do you guys even know why there are glass shards on the floor? I asked both of them. They both shook their heads. That's what the witch used to kill her victims, I told them, whilst making a scary face. Jody was already covering her face with both of her hands, screaming on top of her lungs, whilst Michael and I were laughing. One time, Michael bought an Ouija board he found at an antique store for us to play. Not gonna lie, I was reluctant at first to even touch it. I mean, who knows if we were going to end up getting cursed or what. But fortunately, nothing happened. We tried to make contact if there were any spirits and if any of them were interested in talking to us. There was no response. I even tried to reach out to my dad, but there was no response either. Even though I'm not a huge believer in the supernatural, but there's still a part of me that really hope that it's real. It's all fun and games until one day, Michael introduced to us a game called the Midnight Game. Since we had a streak of luck of not getting haunted or getting cursed, we decided to play along. Plus, the concept of the game was rather interesting, so why the heck not? Here are the rules. Prerequisites. It must be exactly 12 a.m. when you begin performing the ritual. Otherwise, it will not work. Materials. You will need a candle, a piece of paper, a writing implement, matches or a lighter, salt, a wooden door, and at least 1 drop of your own blood. Step 1. Write your full name, first, middle, and last, on a piece of paper. Put at least 1 drop of blood on the paper. Allow it to soak into the paper. Step 2. Turn off all the lights in the place you are doing this. Go to your wooden door and place the paper with your name on it in front of the door. Now, take out the candle and light it. Place it on top of the paper. Step 3. Knock on the door 22 times. The hour must be 12 a.m. upon the final knock. Then, open the door, blow out the candle, and close the door again. At this point, you have just allowed the Midnight Man to enter your house. Step 4. Immediately relight your candle. This is where the game begins. You must now lurk around your now completely dark house with a lit candle in your hand. Your goal is to avoid the Midnight Man at all costs until 3:33 a.m. Should your candle ever go out, that means the Midnight Man is near you. You must relight your candle in the next 10 seconds. If you're not successful in doing this, you must then immediately surround yourself with a circle of salt. If you are unsuccessful in both of your actions, the Midnight Man will create a hallucination of your greatest fear. If you are successful in creating the circle of salt, you must remain in it until the game is over. If you are successful in relighting your candle, you may proceed with the game. You must continue until 3:33 a.m. without being attacked by the Midnight Man or being trapped inside the circle of salt in order to win the game. The Midnight Man will leave your house at 3:33 a.m. and you will be safe to proceed with your morning. Addition: indications that you are near the Midnight Man will include a sudden drop in temperature, seeing a pure black, humanoid figure through the darkness, and hearing very soft whispering coming from an indiscernible source. If you experience any of these, it is advised that you leave the area to avoid the Midnight Man. Even when the game is over, he will always be watching you. Good luck, you're going to need it. Since the game consists of roaming around the house in darkness, we had to ask for permission from our parents. So we did. The game took place at Jodi's house since her family was away for the weekends over at her grandmother's, which means we had the house all to ourselves. The 3 of us had to follow the procedure meticulously, making sure we didn't miss a step, or else the night will be a huge waste. So we prepared all the stuff that was needed and we made sure the house was in a total darkness. When everything was all said and done, we were ready to begin. We wrote our names in different papers and offered our bloods by pricking our finger by using a needle. Before we started knocking on the door, we looked at each other nervously, as if to confirm that there's no turning back. Then we began the knocking. We knocked on the door 21 times, and the final knock at exactly 12 a.m. Opened the door, blew out the candle, and closed the door again. We were quiet, as if waiting for a sign that it indeed worked. I was the first one to break the silence. Did it work? I asked both Jody and Michael. They both shrugged. Don't forget to relight your candle, Sarah, Jody reminded me. I relighted my candle, but as soon as I was relighting it, both Jody and Michael were gone, and I could hear them running away, giggling. Michael, Jody, not funny. Stop messing around, I shouted, but they didn't respond. I began to chase after them. At first, I thought they were messing with me, but there's something about the house. I'm not sure if it's the darkness or something else, but there's something eerie about it. Gradually, the temperature turned colder than usual. I honestly was really petrified to even move a muscle, but I had to chase them down. They were running from one room to another, and in the end, we ended up in the hallway. They were standing at the end of the hallway, facing towards me. I let out a big sigh of relief, and I began to walk closer to them. After I took the third step, they entered the room behind them, and suddenly came out a dark figure. It was as tall as the door frame, and it was looking at me with its glowing red eyes. I stepped back and gradually increased my speed. I saw the figure crouching and let his arms to the floor like an animal. He immediately charged towards me in inhumane speed. I ran as fast as I could towards the main entrance of the house. I'm sure with his speed, he already had caught up to me in a split second. But instead of grabbing me, he stopped in his tracks as soon as he reached the door frame, as if it was intentional. I looked back and I could see he was staring at me with his red glowing eyes and a grin. He retreated back into the house and closed the door shut. I thought I was outside of Jody's house, but after a few moments, I realized I wasn't. I was somewhere else. I was in a room, and there were dead leaves scattered around the floor, and plants had spread throughout the room. The more I looked around, the more familiar it gets. There were glass shards on the floor from the broken windows, and some of the windows were boarded up with wood planks. It couldn't be, I thought to myself. As I walked towards the end of the room, illuminating the surroundings with the candle in my hand, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was at the witch's house. As I walked back in disbelief, my candle had gone out as if somebody was blowing it out. I frantically relight my candle, and as soon as I successfully had done so, I saw a woman was crouching on top of the pentagram, holding a shard of glass in her right hand. Before I could even react, she lunged at me, which made me fall on my back. She was on top of me, and she started stabbing me using the glass shard as a weapon. I gradually blacked out. I woke up, and I was in my bed. I looked around. I was in my room, safe and sound. Was it all just a dream? I asked myself. I went to check for my mom if she was in her room to make sure that everything was really going back to normal. And there she was, reading a book on her bed. What's wrong, honey? My mom asked me, worried. I ran into her arms and hugged her, feeling glad that everything was finally back to normal. What happened? She asked me. I was crying so much I couldn't let out a single word. Before I went back to bed, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I poured the water into the glass, I heard the front door as if someone had entered the house. I looked at the clock. It's 3 a.m. Then shortly after, I could hear someone was calling my name from the living room. Sarah? What's happening? I asked myself as I was making my way to the living room. And there he was, my dad, sitting on the couch facing the window. He said, "Aren't you gonna give your dad a kiss?" I failed the game earlier on during the ritual because after closing the door, I forgot to do step 4 immediately, which was to relight my candle as soon as the game begins. According to Jody and Michael, it was at that time I had vanished. They couldn't find me anywhere in the house, and only the next day, they found me lying unconscious on the kitchen floor. I didn't wake up for 3 days straight. I was in a coma. I was in an endless loop of nightmares. The sun wouldn't come out, and the clock was frozen at 3 a.m. This has been The Enigma. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I do. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. Tell me, would you play the midnight game yourself?